So we're going to talk about another cameo for Shang Tsung today. This one is Sektor, another fantastic pick for Shang Tsung. Probably almost on the same tier as Kano, in my opinion. I think that Sektor and Kano are the two best picks for Shang Tsung. I give the edge to Kano in my mind, but I think it's a really close race, and I would never blame somebody for picking up Sektor. So, we're going to go move by move and talk about what Sektor can offer to Shang Tsung. And first up, we are going to start with the least used move in Sektor's kit, which is his Flamethrower. His Flamethrower 21 frame mid. It says on the menu that the block advantage is -3, but whenever I have done it in practice, I have seen +3 come up on the display. At this range, I don't think it matters very much. We're out of range for sweeps. We're out of range for jabs. The only thing we're in range for, we're even out of range of our overhead. The only thing we're in range for is our low forward 3 as old Shang. And even if we're +3, that is not enough advantage to guarantee this move or stop our opponent from jabbing out of it or even doing a mid to counter it. So it's basically resetting the neutral. Even if it was -3 or if it's +3, it doesn't matter very much. The cool thing about Flamethrower is that it is a restand. So the way we use it is as a combo ender instead of a tool to function on block. We're going to do something like this. And now our opponent is standing back up, and we have 20 frames of hit advantage. This is a 19 frame move, and it sprints forward. So we're actually at the perfect frame advantage and the perfect spacing to fire our low immediately after hitting with this restand. Sometimes the spacing isn't exactly perfect, but it can be. Had it working earlier. You could also do a micro dash and get in there with almost any move that you want either way. So if you want to use your mid, you can dash up. If you want to use your low, you can dash up. If you want to use your overhead, you can dash up. It is a very handy restand, especially because it does not sacrifice very much damage. We're at 360 damage off of that, where we're at 388 off of our normal B&B. So we're sacrificing about 20 damage, maybe a little closer to 30 damage in order to get a restand, which is pretty excellent for this game. The only other way Shang normally gets a restand is by using his EX injection, and that makes you steal your opponent's form as well, which you may or may not want on the restand. Few interesting things about Flamethrower is that it is a move with a pretty substantial gap. If we use it on block, there are two gaps there. There's the gap before the Flamethrower even begins, and there's the gap after the first hit of Flamethrower and before the second. Both of those gaps can be armored, and the second hit never comes out fast enough to break armor. Even on Liu Kang's relatively slow armor, we get beat every time. Just like that. So it's not something we're using to armor break. It's something we are using as a restand almost purely, or to reset neutral if we mess up our timing for the up rocket or something, which we can use to make ourselves plus most of the time. And it's vulnerable to armor, but it is creating spacing that our opponents might struggle at. A lot of opponents are going to think that we've reset the neutral very cleanly after hitting with it, and fall prey to the classic restand trap of having a lot of negative frames because they were hit, but not realizing that they have a ton of negative frames because it just looks like the neutral has been reset. So that's about all there is to say for Flamethrower. I don't think it's the most useful move ever created, or the most useful move in Sektor's kit, but it is a good move, and it's something that we're not unhappy to have, which is more than can be said for some cameos. Next up, we're going to talk about the Tele-punch. I think the Tele-punch has a lot of applications for Shang, but it's not the best move on the planet either. Instead, it is something that we use as Shang to break projectile immunity, because that is not a projectile, but it will hit your opponent anywhere on screen, and it has fantastic tracking. It's very negative, but it's actually got the same frame data on block as your ground skull does. So your ground skull will get beaten by things like Sub-Zero armor, and Sektor will not. Sektor will just punch right through it. In fact, we will have Liu Kang demonstrate for us Motaro's Reflect. As you can see, even though Liu Kang is able to block right there, Motaro gets punched. It is not a projectile. The same thing will happen with things like Viltrumite Stance and Kenshi's Charge, because this has good tracking. And Sub-Zero armor will all get cracked. And if your opponent gets hit by Sektor, you get a combo. Doesn't matter whether you're young or old, you can switch forms as Sektor is firing. There you go. You can do up to 26% pretty easily off of a Sektor hit from full screen. So if your opponent is about to go Sub-Zero armor and you call it out, you get to hit them with the Tele-punch, get a lot of damage for it. This damage is also meterless. Normally, if we want to do a combo from full screen as Shang, we end up having to spend our meter to make triple ground skull happen, like that. Instead, we get to do it for free, just for the Sektor cameo, rather. Not exactly free, but the timing is a little awkward, but it's the sort of thing you can master with just a little bit of practice. And it's great damage, especially when your opponent thought that they were projectile immune. And also because Sektor is so very good at this and his tracking is so excellent, he can hit people who are dashing up. And just like that, you don't need to worry that your opponent is going to put on ice armor, dash up, and avoid Sektor. If he tries anything, even if he dashes as fast as he can go, Sektor is going to punch him. All he can do is block. And if he blocks up close, Sektor is death on block at point blank range. If we do something like this, Sektor is really, really bad there, but only equally as bad as using ground skull is right there. So this isn't changing Chang's kit very much. Sektor is not really opening up any combo routes. 1-2 still doesn't get a great combo, or doesn't combo at all with Tele-punch. As you can see, that's only 2 hits. If we do that, we only got 3 hits. That's the punch, the kick, and the ground skull. This is not a combo. We can do back 2-2 into Tele-punch, which is same side, and that's really the only advantage it has over our normal back 2-2 combo, which goes like this. So we're spending a Kameo to hold the same side there. It's not a great route, and back 2-2, the only advantage it really has is that it ends in a low. Otherwise, it's a slower mid than forward 4, and it has the exact same reach as forward 4. So the only real reason to use this is that you think you might have to end with the low. And adding the Tele-punch to that route doesn't do much at all. It's not something you're likely to do often. Instead, this is something you're using at full screen to beat projectile immunity almost exclusively. Or if you really are convinced that your opponent's going to dash up and you're worried about firing Ground Skull because you think you might miss, you're very unlikely to miss with Tele-punch. And it is very similar to Ground Skull otherwise. So, that leaves only Sektor's final move, which is Up Rocket, and this move is everything. Up Rocket does it all. We can fire our projectiles with Up Rocket, and we don't create a true block string the way that we would with, like, Kano, right? But if our opponents respect Up Rocket, as most people know to do, because it has very good tracking, and will hit even if you start hitting me, Up Rocket is very likely to hit you and break your combo. So most people sit and respect Up Rocket anytime that they see Sektor on screen. They just know that they should stand there. And now we have a mind game where if I call Sektor, I can try to do Ground Skull, or I can try to do more Straight Skulls. And if you tried to dash forward to beat Straight Skull, you will get hit by, or to beat Sektor Rocket, you will get hit by Straight Skull. And if you stay in place and block, you will block the Ground Skull before the Up Rocket actually hits. And that will cause you to be frame trapped into another Ground Skull. So we can demonstrate here. See how that works. The rocket hits after. And it says here that the rocket gives 118 frames of block advantage in the raw. And off of Ground Skull, there is... What's it say here? It doesn't tell us the recovery. The recovery is 40. So we have... If we're firing this, we have plenty of time to fire this again before our opponent can move. Just like that. And if our opponent gets caught by it, we hit confirm into a full combo, as we always do with Ground Skull. Just like that. And start all over again. So, if you think that your opponent is likely to dash up, but you want to go into the Ground Skull, you even have a further mind game with this, because you can position the rocket in front of your opponent. Now, this is backwards on the menu. It says position behind when you press down. That is what happens when you press down. It positions in front. And if you press up, it positions behind. So the menu actually says it wrong. Position in front of your opponent is down. Position behind your opponent is up. These different versions of aiming the up rocket are also useful in combo routes, including your combo route for Form Stealer. Now, I'm not very good at doing it because I'm not a Sektor player, but it is possible to do a Form Steal and then continue the combo from there, doing this route. You basically call the down up rocket, the one that says position behind on the menu, but that is actually position in front, as your first ground skull is connecting in your combo. And honestly, the later you can make it connect, the better. Gives you more time to transform. Just like that. So, you can learn the timing and nail down Form Stealer combos in the same way that you might do with somebody like Kano or Scorpion, or really most cameos can do something analogous to this. But it's the timing is a little bit more difficult to find with Sektor, but it is loose and easy to use. It is also very easy to get the exact combo you want. You don't have to time it in a really tight way, where with Kano you need to hit with only one Kano knife in order to get optimal combos from Form Steal. With Sektor, there's only the one missile. The only upside you have is that the later you hit the missile, the more time you have to transform before you have to swing as your opponent. So, as long as you're within enough frames that you can actually put your opponent's move out, you're good. Whereas with Kano, you're actually trying to connect the knives at the exact right frame. The other big application of Sektor Missile, I think, is pretty obvious to anybody who's fought a Sektor. Block pressure. Now, there are plenty of ways to mistime this, or to accidentally press the in-front call instead of your neutral call and put it in the wrong spot. But all you gotta do is work on the timing a little bit. And you can get it to a spot because of Shang's long strings. Where your opponent is forced to block. Now, if you're timing it just a little bit early, your opponent could hit you, but then they'll get hit by the Sektor missile and it'll break the combo. So you're only going to get hit for, maybe 60, 70 damage before that missile connects and breaks it. And sometimes when the missile connects, depending on the position you're in the combo and how much hit stun the last hit your opponent has, you might actually be able to combo them because the missile has enough hit stun to allow you to combo. As you can see, it's not a terribly difficult window to find. And in fact, one of our weird Shang tricks using Sektor is based on using that missile to continue a combo. Just like that. We can use EX injection. It has to be the EX version. And the missile to restand our opponent, turn into them, then the missile hits, and we can continue the combo with the hit stun that the missile generated as our opponent with the enhanced damage from EX injection. This is a 2-bar move, EX injection, and it will cost a Kameo shot from Sektor. So this is an expensive way to hit your opponent, but it hits for a lot of damage. As you can see with Liu Kang, we got up to 435, and now we're Liu Kang with a damage buff. This gives us a lot of time as our opponent, and it gives us just a high damage combo route. If we want the restand, we can also just take the restand. We can let the Sektor missile hit, or we can just do EX injection, which is something Shang can always do. And we could, in fact, use Sektor again to restand our opponent at the end of the combo if we have both charges. You have to keep in mind that the gravity scaling is pretty wild at this point because you've hit with so many ground skulls. But if you keep them grounded, as every character is capable of doing, you can just restand your opponent again with this 19 frames of advantage from the Flamethrower, and then do whatever you want with a lot of damage coming out. This is a decent way to mag dump your opponent, and because you're now your opponent with a damage buff, this is actually likely to mean death. As you can see, we only sacrificed about 10 damage for the restand. And you have 19 frames of advantage, you're playing as a character with different mix-ups than you were before, and you have a damage buff. You really can just win the game right now in some scenarios by hitting for another combo with your opponent's character. So, we have an interesting way to mag dump all of our meter and Kameo with Sektor that we don't have with other cameos. So the caveats to this projectile are that although at full screen it is making block strings for us, if our opponent does something with projectile immunity like Motaro or Viltrumite Stance or Kenshi Charge or anything like that, we are getting beat. The missile will not do what we want it to do at those ranges. When our opponent uses projectile immunity of some kind. So if we do this, you can see the missile gets reflected. It does not come back at us, so in that way it's not a super dangerous thing to throw out against projectile immunity. And because it's an ambush cameo, we're not super worried about something like Sub-Zero armor. This doesn't really get in the way of whatever we were doing before. Just know that we don't actually create block pressure when we do this if our opponent has projectile immunity available, because they will throw that missile right back out the door. The same applies to any kind of projectile immunity. The one kind of projectile immunity that we do beat with Sektor is crushing projectiles. So we're going to do this. As you can see, our projectile is still coming. Now, is this the best thing ever? Far from it. Our opponent can almost universally find a way to block. But right there, that's a good example. We fire Sektor, and projectile crushing moves like Liu Kang, Sindel, Tanya, Sub-Zero, if they want to fire a projectile directly back at us reversal style, with a crushing projectile, Sektor missile will call them out. So it does have more applications in the zoning game than just falling apart to all projectile immunity. You can also make it a homing missile or an extra Kameo bar. Just like that. This is not very impressive. I've seen people use it for very specific combo routes on some characters. I've yet to find a combo route where this is necessary and you couldn't just aim in front or aim behind your opponent when you call him, because you know where your opponent will be at certain points in the combo route, so you don't need to do wild homing routes. However, if your opponent actually gets thrown a really long distance in your combo for some reason, you might still be able to extend it with the homing missile. This would be the sort of thing that Shang doesn't need, because Shang actually kind of holds his opponent right in the same space for his whole combo. He doesn't move across the screen very much. But if you're playing as your opponent's character from a form steal, this might come in handy. And that's the other caveat of Sektor, is that he is a little bit harder to make pressure with in a form steal. While he can technically do it with everybody, because his ambush up rocket is a fantastic move that forces your opponent to deal with it, it is very slow to hit your opponent. So you need to find a move that keeps your opponent in block stun for a long time while that Sektor missile finds them, in order to make it a real block string, the way that Shang does with his spinning spikes. You also can't just make block strings out of anything, because when you call Sektor as part of your long block string as Shang, you're actually calling him very early. You're not calling him as spinning spike starts. You're calling him as the whole string starts, because if you don't, he's going to hit too late. See, even that, our opponent could have jabbed us there. They wouldn't have gotten anything more than that. But if you're too late, your opponent could jab you and then block, and then your Sektor missile... Again, it's your turn now, but your Sektor missile hasn't dealt any damage. Your opponent's dealt damage to you. You've probably got a bad trade going on, even though you kept your turn. So, in order to find a way to time it well, you need a long string or a move that hits many times and keeps your opponent in block stun for a long time. And not everybody has access to something like that. Smoke just simply can't do it, and many other characters also just can't do it. Liu Kang is fortunate in that he can. He has several moves that have long hit animations, including his Dancing Dragon move with his bicycle kicks. So, when you're trying to make Form Stealer block strings with Sektor, you're going to have a harder time than with somebody like Kano or Striker. So, as far as Shang's specific strengths and weaknesses, I think Sektor is covering all the bases, at least to some degree. His Tele-punch is shoring up the weakness that we have to projectile immunity by just punching right through it, and giving us full combos when our opponents think that they can dash in after a projectile immunity. However, it doesn't cover it as well as somebody like Kano does, because with Kano, we would just be firing Kano along with our triple skulls. Now, if our opponent attempts projectile immunity, they get hit by Kano along with the skulls. And if they didn't use projectile immunity, then Kano would just hit them along with the skulls, and we would get extra damage and send them back to full screen with Kano Ball. And that's fantastic. That's exactly what we want to do. The problem is we don't want to use Tele-punch unless our opponent is going to use projectile immunity. If they're not going to do it, then Tele-punch is very slow, and it's very negative on block. So we're more likely to hit with something like Ground Skull and have the same frame disadvantage if they block than we are with Tele-punch, and we won't be spending Kameo meter in that scenario. So, because it requires an alteration to our game plan, he is not the strongest Kameo for beating projectile immunity. However, if your opponent doesn't have projectile immunity, if you're willing to do a Sektor pick out the gate, and then be willing to switch to somebody like Kano if your opponent has projectile immunity that you struggle to deal with, Sektor can be a great pick. He deals with crushing projectiles very well. He deals with our issues up close very well by providing us great block pressure, but that block pressure is specific to Shang and not something that can just be universally tossed out like Kano Ball can to make everybody plus. Sektor requires knowledge of the combo structure, and it requires the combo structure to have a lot of block stun for his plus frames to be integrated effectively. He also gives us access to the extra utility of Flamethrower, which lets us restand our opponents or reset the neutral if we don't want to deal if we mess up our timing on the missile. We can instead reset the neutral with Flamethrower and not feel so bad about it. However, the Flamethrower does end with weird spacing on block and has armorable gaps, so it's not the most ideal way to create block pressure or end our strings. We're definitely trying to do the up rocket for that. Otherwise, things Sektor won't do is he will not eat crushing projectiles the way that somebody like Kano or Shujinko might, because he does not show up in front of us unless we use the Flamethrower, but the Flamethrower is not what we're going to be using at a range where our opponent throws out projectiles like that. The way that up rocket beats crushing projectiles is by just not getting crushed by them and then hitting our opponent, which in many cases is more effective than something like Kano having to be in front of them. So he's great for matches like that, but then if our opponent's going to bust out Sub-Zero or Motaro, he changes from being great there to struggling there, which is ultimately why I prefer Kano to him. That, plus if you're going to make Form Stealer routes, you need to work a lot harder to make Sektor's pressure unblock. So that covers the weaknesses of Shang, are his lack of block pressure up close. We've got that covered. His strength of zoning, we've got that enhanced. And extra utility from a restand and Form Stealer combos, and in fact a very interesting mag dump Form Stealer combo, which can always guarantee fatal blows as well because you keep your opponent standing and get to use their own strings. So it's very easy to integrate a fatal blow into one of Sektor's Form Stealer combos, where it is much harder with somebody like Kano or Striker to integrate those into Form Stealer combos. As you can see, that connected just fine. So you can end up with very big damage by doing EX Form Stealer into your opponent's string into their own fatal blow, and really just, like I said, mag dumping your opponent with everything you've got. So that's the video. Thank you for watching. Give me a like, a comment, a subscribe, a pound of flesh, your inheritance, your firstborn child, and I'll see you next time.